Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Truth Wanted. I am your host, Nate Smith, filling in for Objectively Dan, who sadly had something come up at the last moment. So I am happy to be your host of last resort. You may remember me from such ACA shows as Secular Sexuality, Nonprofits, and Lead Paint, Delicious but Deadly. I'm just kidding. That's not an ACA show. This is the live call-in show that happens every single week, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time, where we want to talk to you. We want to talk to people. We want to talk to folks from around the globe about what they believe and why. So if you want to talk to us, you can give us a call at 512-991-9242. Or if you've joined us in the 21st century at tiny.cc/calltw. So give us a call, folks. We want to talk to you. Truth Wanted. Truth Wanted is evidently a product of the atheist community of Austin. Now, what's the atheist community of Austin, you might ask? Well, it's a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of positive atheist culture and the separation of religion and government, a noble cause. Each week, we have a special guest. Joining me this week is no different. Welcome, MD Aware.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. Very happy to be here.
I'm glad to talk to you, especially as a fellow snowbro, as I recently discovered before the show. Apparently, Dan absconds for 1 week, and the Canadians move right in to take over.
Yeah, we're taking over the ACA.
Yeah, but we promise we won't burn down the White House this time.
Yeah, not this time.
Yeah, technically, wasn't us; it was the British. But hey, we were watching, and we're drinking beers at the same time, I'm sure. So, MD Aware, tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do? What's your gig? What are you up to?
Sure. So I am a resident physician in general surgery. So like those folks on Grey's Anatomy in the first season, that's like what I do. And I am also, at the same time as I'm doing my residency, I'm doing a PhD in biomedical engineering. So my PhD focuses on cancer nanomedicine. So I'm working at the intersection of sort of nanotechnology and nanomedicine and obviously cancer. I specialize in gastrointestinal cancer, which goes along with my surgical training. And eventually I'm going to hopefully become a attending gastrointestinal cancer surgeon. So that's where I'm sort of heading. That's what I'm doing right now. I did my undergrad in life sciences, so like your basic biology type stuff. And my undergrad training was very sort of a general scientific foundation and then more depth in biology. So I took courses in astronomy and physics and chemistry and psychology as well as the biology. And I had a special interest in evolutionary biology, so I looked a lot into that. My backup, in case I didn't get into medical school, was to go and study evolutionary biology, and I'd already been accepted to graduate school for that. So I had a special interest in it, and I've sort of cultivated all of this knowledge that just happens to come in very handy for the type of topics that we get on Truth Wanted. So I'm happy to bring all of that here.
So it sounds to me like you never ever sleep. Would that be a fair assessment?
Well, I certainly sleep less than I probably should.
Okay. Yeah, I
Yeah.
believe it. I'm now harboring suspicions that you're in league with Skynet and you've attempted to infiltrate this show in a devious plot to undermine the most skeptical among us.
Well,
But
they are the prime target.
exactly, because everybody else is going to play along, but the skeptics, they're going to be the first ones that are onto you.
Absolutely.
Yes, and speaking of wacky conspiracy theories, this is the show that wants to talk to you folks. If you believe something off color, something maybe not in the mainstream, give us a call because we are nice people and we want to hear from you guys. Again, it's 512-991-9242 or on your computer, tiny.cc/calltw. So, MD, this is your first spot on an ACA show, which is amazing. I feel privileged that I'm able to usher you into the fold. You reached out to us, right?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Tell our audience a little bit about why you felt that you needed to do that.
So I listen to the podcasts of all sort of the ACA shows while I'm doing all of my lab experiments and things like that. And the thing that I realized is that a lot of the problems that I think people have, a lot of the callers have, is a misattribution of causation, right? So they see thing A, event A, and they see consequence B, or what they perceive to be consequence B, and they draw a link there. And they say, well, this happened and then this happened, so there must be a causal relationship, right? A must have caused B. And because of the way that we're trained to think in a PhD and in the sciences, and because I'm doing it every day, I'm thinking like, well, how can people think this, you know? Like there's so many steps in between A and B that everyone's overlooking. And so my hope is that if people have these questions, that I can shine a little bit of light on that and point out some of the steps that you'd need to go to if you want to actually draw that causal link. You know, there's going to be, you can't just go straight from A to B. You got to go to A and then A1 and A2 and A3. There's a whole bunch of steps in between these two before you can make a reasonable conclusion that one leads to the other.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of folks out there that tend to jump from hypothesis to conclusion and skip the most important steps in the middle that make the scientific process what it is. So I think that's great that you're here, and I think you're going to be a great guest for the show. Yeah, this is going to be interesting. So you said that you're studying nanotechnology. Now, I want you to tell me a little bit about that because I'll tell you why later. But you already know we were talking a little bit about it before the show. But tell me more about nanotechnology and how it applies to your research.
Sure. So, I mean, I think that people overestimate the sophistication of nano blank, right? It's just sort of like a buzzword. It's like quantum, right? So when we think about things medically and biologically, there are different scales, obviously. And so the smallest scale that we usually work with when we're talking about medicine are like small molecule drugs, things like aspirin, right? And those are like a handful of atoms sort of thing, right? And sort of the next big step up is when you get to the nanomedicine. So it's actually bigger. Like people think of nano as being really small, but it's actually bigger than a lot of the drugs that we use. But the thing that's unique about it is that nano ends up being about the size of sort of biology. A lot of things in biology are nano size. You know, cells end up being sort of in that nano size region. And so there's a lot of hope that we can use nanotechnologies that are built on the same scale to affect biology. And so my research focuses on delivering nanoparticles with specific properties to cancer cells, essentially. And it's the property of these nanomedicines is that they preferentially accumulate in cancer cells. So in theory, it's like that silver bullet that everyone's looking for, right? You want a therapeutic or a drug or a treatment that will only destroy the tumor. Because the problem that we face right now with chemotherapy and all that stuff is that the chemotherapy is like a poison. It poisons everything. And the whole principle is that the things that are growing the fastest, which are the cancer cells, are the ones that are going to consume more of the toxin and therefore die more quickly. And you hope that the rest of your cells will be okay. And so with nanomedicine, we try to avoid all of that toxicity to your normal cells by delivering the drug or the treatment or whatever it is specifically to the tumor. And now I do that. So I work with nanomedicines, but I also work with lasers because this nanomedicine that I'm working with is activated by lasers. So I give an injection of a nanomedicine to a test animal, and then I with a tumor, and then I shine a laser on the tumor and I try to kill the tumor as best I can. So that's essentially what I do on a daily basis.
I'm even more convinced that you're working for Skynet now. I'm not going to lie.
Cyberdyne Systems.
I'm not sure what your real name is, but I have a sneaking suspicion that it might be Miles Dyson. Yeah, we actually talked about animal testing on a recent episode of the Nonprofits that will be airing on Sunday between Talk Heathen and the Atheist Experience. And
Cool.
had some interesting perspectives on that. So, yeah, definitely tune in for that, folks. So we do have callers waiting for us. Please
Fantastic.
hold on the line because we want to talk to you. But we still do have open lines, folks. So if you're shy, you're hanging in the shadows. MD Ware's a pretty nice guy. I've been told I'm a pretty nice guy, but I haven't seen sufficient evidence to prove that. But give us a call, 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/calltw. Now, before we get to calls, I do need to shout out our Patreon of the week. Every single week, we shout out a Patreon that donates through tiny.cc/PatreonTW for supporting this show. This show is all run by volunteers. Oh, look, it's a picture, Dan. I guess they couldn't get me in there in time. That's fine. Tiny.cc/Patreon.tw. This show is all run by volunteers. Myself, the crew, the guest. We don't get paid for this. We just want to get this message out to you folks. And if you want to support that, please give us money. If you can't give us money, share, like, subscribe, etc., etc. This week's Patreon of the week, who allows us to continue with our mission, is, drum roll, Denny Thomas. Denny Thomas, thank you for helping us accomplish our mission. We super appreciate it. We appreciate everybody that is able to support the mission of Truth Wanted and the mission of the atheist community of Austin. Thank you again, Denny Thomas. All right. Now, I think I've been told I have sufficient empirical evidence to believe that this is a call-in show. So, MD Aware, on the maiden voyage of your ACA journey, are you ready to take some phone calls?
I'm totally ready. Let's do it.
I think you were born ready. So I think we need to talk. We need to talk to Richard from New York. Richard from New York, you are on Truth Wanted. What's on your mind?
Hi, it's good to be on.
Thank you for calling. What do you got for us today?
Well, I have a story about time travel and how I time traveled myself.
Is there a DeLorean involved?
Nope, no DeLorean, no machine. It was all wireless.
Okay, all right. That is cool, man. I'm all ears. Dive in.
Okay, so one day in 2018, I was out on a walk just in the neighborhood, and I'm a schizophrenic. I hear voices in my head, and
Okay.
I believe it's a spiritual thing, not a mental thing, but that's just an opinion. And anyway, one of the voices in my head, who I identify as the Holy Spirit, said to throw out my phone into a waste bin when I was out on the walk. And so I complied. And the next day when I was out on a walk without my phone, in the flash, my surroundings changed, and I was back in a park where my family used to have family reunions.
Not the same park, I'm assuming.
Nope. It was probably 3 or 4 miles away from where I was walking. But when I looked away from my walking trail, the surroundings around me just suddenly flashed and changed.
How long did they change for?
Well, I was there in the park for about 45 minutes. I saw myself on my mom's lap as a kid. I estimate the year to be about 1992, so it was from 2018 to 1992. Based on my age, I was about 3 or 4 at the time.
So it sounds like this is a memory that you're reliving. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was plain as day. It was a regular memory. I remember it because it was so extraordinary, of course.
And how do you know you weren't just reliving a memory in your sort of mind's eye? Like, how do you know you were actually time traveling?
Well, as far as I can tell, it was me on my mom's lap, and I looked around and there was my family there and all of my relatives. I got the feeling like I was alone, like if I talked to them, they wouldn't reply, kind of like it was a recording. It was kind of a strange feeling.
Did you try to talk to them at all?
No, not really. I got the feeling that if I did anything, it wouldn't be responded to. This makes me think that, are you familiar with determinism?
I am. I'm sure MD Aware is as well.
This makes me think that the timeline that I was in was more deterministically set as opposed to probabilistic. So I think that whatever forces put probability into the universe, or however that works, like quantum effects, I'm not quite an expert on it, but whatever effects do that were lessened in this area, so that because I had been there previously, I couldn't really alter it for all I could do.
Okay. I just want to slow down for a second because we're jumping a little bit. I think the first thing we need to do before we start talking about whether this is evidence of a deterministic rather than a quantum universe or a probabilistic universe, we have to establish that you in fact time traveled, right? Would you agree with that, Richard?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so how do you think we can make that determination?
Well, it was as real as I'm calling you now. So if that was a memory that I was reliving, then this could be a memory that I'm reliving too. I mean, for all we know, we're in the simulation theory, like in the Matrix, and everything's a brain in the jar. But so there's no certainty that it was time travel. But as far as I could tell from all of the senses that I was gathering, it was a different time.
Well, we don't need to be certain, right? We just need to have a good reason to believe something, right? So I think that I have a good reason to believe that I'm on Truth Wanted and I'm talking to Nate and Richard, and that's based on sort of my history. Now there are things, you're right, there's assumptions that go into that at the back end that we have to make to get out of to be able to actually investigate the world. But once we make those assumptions, we can start to try to draw conclusions. So if we're talking about this time travel situation, is there any way that you can prove that this was time travel versus a memory? How would you, if you were me and I was telling you this story, how would you differentiate between something that was someone reliving a memory and an actual incidence of time travel?
Well, I think that reality is dictated by the senses, as we don't really have any other way. So the fact that I saw my family there, I saw myself on my mom's lap back when I was still blonde, and the fact I saw my relatives around, and that I can vaguely remember seeing a man who seemed out of place from when I was that young, when I was 3 or 4. I get the feeling that it was indeed time travel. I don't know the alternative. Maybe it could have been in 2018, but a bunch of body doubles of me and my family, but that doesn't seem as likely.
That seems a lot less likely to me as well. But I think MD Aware made a really good point. How would you be able to tell the difference between a hallucination and an actual instance of time travel if, as you say, you didn't attempt to interact with your mother or your younger self or anybody around? How would we be able to tell that this was an incidence of time travel and not just, a hallucination, or maybe you fell asleep on the park bench, or, some more mundane explanation? Why does this have to be time
Well,
travel? What property does time travel have that any other explanation could not have?
well, I don't think that there's any way to account for it in terms of a dream, because usually in a dream you have limited sensory ability or limited capability, like you feel like you're floating or you're disconnected from your body, and I didn't feel any of that. It felt quite as real as I'm sitting here now.
Well,
But
sometimes
Sorry, what was
I
there
just
is
want
such a
to.
thing as lucid dreaming, where people do have control of their dreams and are able to interact with with what's going on. I do it myself sometimes. Not a lot of people are able to lucid dream, but it is a thing. Sorry, MD, go ahead.
I just want to pick up on something you said, Richard. You said most of the time you XYZ with dreams, but we don't even have to think about most of the time, right? I think I would go as far as to say that the least likely incident, right? The least likely thing that happens with a dream is still more likely than time travel, right? The least likely component of a dream, the least likely property that a dream could have is still going to be more likely than time travel. Would you agree with that, Richard?
Well, not based on my experience, because I was out walking and I was highly alert at the time. I wasn't sitting on a park bench or napping or anything like that. So there would have been a discontinuity there where, like, if I had sat down on a bench and I closed my eyes, then I would be willing to believe that it was a dream. But because I was active and out walking, it seems less likely to me.
Let me give you an example of what I mean. If pretend you're someone like me, you're a doctor, and someone comes in to you and they have a cough and a sore throat. The most likely cause of something like that is a cold, virus of some kind like that, right? It's going to go away on its own. A much less likely cause is something like tuberculosis. So even if the cold hypothesis doesn't fully explain the symptoms, it's still a much more likely thing to occur, right? It's much more likely to occur than, say, tuberculosis. And so I think what you have to do is you have to rule out the most likely cause. You have to completely rule it out, regardless of how likely or your assessment of the probability that it'll fit with what you're seeing. You still have to rule it out before you can go on to the less likely thing. Would you agree with that, Richard?
Yeah, I'd say so. But the only way that we base our attitudes of what is most likely is based on our experience. So if we have a one-off, like a black swan event, then how do we know that it's not the regular everyday life that we have? I mean, doesn't a belief that everything unlikely or uncommon is based on a more common event lead you to believing only in things that are common?
I get your point.
I mean, less common. I get that, yeah, but less common events still happen. Like believing that or knowing that events that happen more often do happen more often doesn't necessarily doesn't preclude me from believing in rare events. I mean, it's still possible.
Yeah, and
But what MD's saying is that before we proceed to something that we have less experience with, don't you think it behooves you to eliminate the more likely explanation first?
well, the hallucinations was the other one, and I can
Yeah.
easily differentiate hallucinations. I get a lot of them. They're usually glowing lights on the wall. In fact, they're always glowing lights on the wall, and not everyday life. I mean, I don't have any hallucinations which are just like regular non-glowing objects.
So you've never had any hallucinations that were anything other than glowing objects on the wall?
Nope, that's pretty much all I see, glowing lights on the wall. Or like eyes.
Richard, you mentioned that you had schizophrenia. Would you agree that
yeah.
other people who have schizophrenia have hallucinations that they can't differentiate between the hallucination and reality? Would you say that that's true for others with schizophrenia?
Well, I think that's more of a philosophical thing, saying that reality is defined by the senses, and that if they can't differentiate between hallucinations and reality, it's because they view hallucinations as just another part of reality. Whereas,
okay, let me redefine that then. The reality that's consistent with what other people seem to observe. I see what you're getting at.
Reality.
You're having trouble with the solipsistic argument, right? You're saying, I don't actually know that, all of this stuff is just my senses. I get it. But if we assume that our senses are right most of the time, and that we can rely on the, other people to sort of check our conclusions, would you agree that there's a distinction between what most people assume or say is the truth and what some people with certain mental conditions that describe something that other people call hallucinations? Would you say that there's a difference between those two things?
Yeah, I mean, hallucinations are subjective, and most of reality is objective. I think that a lot of people have a bias towards objective reality, primarily because of science, given that you can't really test anything subjective. So they're less likely to believe in it or trust the validity of something that's subjective.
So do you think we should trust anything without testing it?
Well, I think that reality is based on the senses, and there's nothing purely objective. All that we have for objectivity is shared subjectivity. So sharing something doesn't necessarily imply that it is the case. It just implies that there is a concurrent or a according reaction by someone who also agrees with it. For all we know, it could be entirely simulation theory, and even the reactions that give us the agreement upon subjective reality are all subjective in nature, and that there is no objective reality. Essentially, there is no spoon.
But Richard, if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound?
My thought is that you can't prove that it makes a sound.
Well, I think that you could demonstrate that it does indeed produce sound waves, and if there's no one there to perceive those sound waves, they still exist. They're still there. So I don't know if I can get on board with reality is only what the senses perceive, because there was a whole lot of reality before there were people around to perceive it. The Earth's only 4 billion years old. The universe is 14.7 and change. So there has been a reality long before there were people around to perceive it, or protozoa or tiny little animals swimming around in the prehistoric goo, right? So I don't know if I can get on board with that.
Well, I think that the only way that we know that there is reality that's that old is through the senses, and by observation of the cosmic microwave background through the senses by someone's eye in a telescope. And there's no separating objective reality from subjective realities. So objective reality may exist or it may not. There's really no way to tell without using the senses.
Yeah, so I think this still goes back to solipsism ultimately, right, Richard? I think what you're saying is, well, all of you scientists and objectivists, you're just assuming that your senses are reliable, and that everything you're observing is a representation of air quotes reality, right? And you're saying, well, who's to say that my subjective experience isn't exactly as valid as your objective, your, again, air quotes, objective experience? Is that sort of what you're saying, Richard?
More or less, though I wouldn't do it dismissively. I'm also into science. I've been a geek since I was young.
Right. So I think that's where we depart, right? At some point, actually or at least that's where I depart. I fully acknowledge that I'm assuming that, some of my senses are right some of the time. Most of my senses are right most of the time. And there are, liminal states that I can be in where my senses deceive me. But I rely on other people. I make the assumption that I'm not the only thing that exists and that other minds exist and can, verify my experience. And it sounds like you don't make that assumption.
Well, no, I wouldn't call myself a solipsist because I do believe that people do exist, and I can't verify it, but just intuitively it seems likely to me. I would call myself more as someone who believes in the validity of subjectivity as opposed to direct solipsism itself, because I do believe that there is something other than my mind. I guess I just can't prove it. So I guess you might call that solipsism. I never think of myself as a solipsist, though.
So you mentioned So you said something about the validity. You believe in the validity of a subjective experience. How do you show? Because validity is something that you have to demonstrate, right? If I want to say that something is valid, I have to demonstrate that in some fashion. So how would you demonstrate the validity of your subjective experience?
Well, that's the problem. How does anyone validate or how does anyone share the validity of their subjective experience? There's only subjective experience. So
we usually compare it to an objective standard, or at least the subjective experiences of others, right? So if I saw something, appear in the room that I couldn't explain, I might ask other people in the room if they also saw that. That's a way of trying to validate my subjective experience and see if that was something that occurred outside of me or something that occurred within my mind.
Yeah, I would call that shared subjectivity. That's the basis for objective reality that I follow. I don't think that cameras are inherently a better judge of the world than eyes. I think that shared subjectivity is probably the best way to get objectivity.
I think that's a sort of a different a different tack to get onto. But then so how do you, if you agree that you sort of need a shared subjectivity, as you call it, how did you validate your time travel experience using this shared subjectivity?
I didn't. I can't prove that it was objective, but it was as real to me as everyday life is. So if I can't prove that that's objective, then I can't prove that right now is objective, and I can't technically prove that anyone exists.
But you can, we have a shared subjectivity, right?
Yeah, we're here.
Yeah. So I think that goes back to Nate's question, right? He asked you for evidence of shared subjectivity, right? He asked if you spoke to the people that you saw when you time traveled. Were you able to validate this, right? That's what Nate was really asking.
I spoke to some of my relatives who were at the family reunion, and they said that they couldn't remember. Granted, it was a long time ago, and I barely remember myself.
So what do you think the most reasonable thing to believe is then? If you can't get your subjective validation, what do you think the most reasonable thing to believe is?
Well, I think that I'm just going based on the status quo that I assume that objective reality exists, and this is no different than any other day. So I have no reason to think that it was entirely subjective, even though I didn't share it. Like, I never share going to the bathroom, but I'm pretty sure that going to the bathroom is objective.
Do you see how this is a little bit of a different thing, though? Like, how many times have you time traveled versus how many times have you used the washroom?
One was a one-off, and the other times probably pretty often.
Right. So
Right.
again, I'm going to quote like Carl Sagan, who said extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, right? And the extraordinary thing here is that you're talking about an event that even for you has only occurred once. So I would call that an extraordinary event. It's not part of your ordinary everyday experience. And so I would, if it were me, I would want some additional verification that that had actually occurred.
That would be the first thing that I would do too. You know, if I were transported back to a family memory from years ago, the first thing I would do would be like, wow, this is cool. I'm going to go talk to my Aunt Karen. I'm going to go see if I'm going to investigate this. And the fact that you didn't do that kind of makes me think that maybe it was just a dream or a hallucination. Why wouldn't you want to go up and investigate and talk and find out whether this is a real experience or not? Especially considering, like you said, this doesn't happen to you. This hasn't happened to you. You do suffer hallucinations because of your condition, but not this one. So I would think, especially in your position as somebody who does suffer from this and encountering a new phenomena, this would be the first thing that you want to do, is you want to go and you want to verify this thing. And the fact that you didn't do that makes me think that you are more an observer than a participant, hence probably dreaming.
Well, I would call myself an observer, yes, but I wouldn't say that necessarily equates to dreaming.
Well, but you said yourself that you felt like if you were to interfere or interact, that it would end.
No, not
Again,
that it would
sound
end.
like you were reliving
I
a
wouldn't get
pleasant
any
experience
response.
that you didn't want to stop. I'm not judging you for that. I wouldn't want it to stop either. I would love to go back to a pleasant memory from my past and watch it again. That would be amazing. So no, I'm not judging you for not wanting to disturb that. But doesn't that sort of indicate to you that that probably inside of your own mind, it was a construct of that mind, whether it was a dream or a hallucination, doesn't really matter. It seems to me like it was probably just a machination of the wetware inside of your skull.
But let's take a step back, Richard. Would you say that it's more reasonable to say that it was actually time travel, or would it be more fair to say that you had an experience and we don't really have any good verification or a firm idea of what happened? It was an unprecedented event, even for you.
Yeah.
So
that's what I was saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not even, I'm not even going to push you as from a scientific perspective. I won't even get you to say it was definitely a hallucination, because frankly, we don't have any evidence that it was a hallucination per se, right? All we have is a reasonable, I think all we have is a reasonable belief that this was not in fact time travel. And so we would have to do more investigation to figure out what the actual cause of this was. And so I would say, Richard, if you have this experience, so what I would say, if I can give you homework, is I would think about, if this happens again, how am I going to be able to verify it? How can I test this? What can I do in the past? Maybe you can, go up to one of your relatives who's still alive, and you could give them a password or something like that. And you say, if I say this word to you in the future at some point, then I want you to say this back to me, right? And then you've created a method of testing. And then when you come back to the present day, you can go to that relative and you can test to see if they've taken that word, right? So that's like just one example of something you could do to test whether this is a thing that actually occurred. Do you think that does that sound reasonable to you, Richard?
Well, I wasn't really interested in testing it. In fact, at the time, I was in a very calm state, and I had no doubt that it was real. It seemed very obvious to me that I was in the past, and even though this was a rare experience, I had the strange feeling about it that I was just kind of gliding through it. And
so, are you interested in testing it now?
Abnormal. Well, after the fact, there's not really much that I could do, and I still have the memory plain as day, so to me it's proven.
I agree.
I mean, I understand that it's only an anecdote, so I can't really relay it.
But I'm saying if this were to happen again, would you be interested in testing it?
I suppose I could go through the effort. It's not like something that would be a priority to me.
I mean, it kind of should be, especially if you're going to purport it as an incidence of time travel. I would think you would want some good reason for other people to believe that it is such, and not just, as you say, not just a cool story. And it is a cool story, don't get me wrong, but you kind of probably should be more interested in finding out if it is an actual instance of time travel or just a dream. Especially like you sound like a smart guy. You sound like you're, like you've really thought about this. So for you to go from, I'm not the one
working on nanotechnology.
No, well, neither am I, Richard. But fortunately we've got MD Aware here to watch over us. But I think we're going to move on. It's not as
complicated as it sounds.
I'm sure it's just very, very small. I think we do need to move on, but Richard, I do want to thank you for calling and sharing your experience with us. And hey, like if this happens again, try to interact. Right? Houdini had a thing where the last few years of his life, he was trying to debunk mysticism and seances, and he gave his wife a password so that if she could ever contact him in the afterlife, he would know this password. And I think that's kind of what MD Aware is getting at here. So yeah, if it happens again, do that and get us a passcode, and we want to hear back from you.
Seems unlikely.
Absolutely.
Well, if it's only happened once, it seems unlikely that it would happen again. But I mean, strange things happen, right? One time a strange thing happened to you, so it could happen again.
Yeah,
but Richard, I want to thank you very much for calling in, and that was an interesting call. Yeah, no, that was great, man. You take care. Interesting. Time travel in the park.
I don't know. What do you think, Nate? How did I do? Inaugural voyage.
That was really good. You asked some great questions. You took him down a path and sort of challenged him a little bit, without being mean, because we don't want to be mean on this show. We want folks to call in. We want to talk to them. But
we don't want to besmirch the good name of Canadians.
No, certainly not. We Canadians have a very good name for being polite and kind. But I don't know, man. Somebody who's already admitted to having hallucinations to have another claim about a hallucination that they're sure was real, but did nothing to demonstrate that or did nothing to investigate that. I'm skeptical. I'm not convinced.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
I don't know. Maybe if he had Doc Brown and Einstein in the DeLorean, then I might have been a little more convinced. But yeah. I don't know. It to me, it just boils down to a cool story, which is the problem with a lot of these claims of the paranormal, of which I even have one too. Like I lived in a not haunted house, but encountered things for which I have no explanation. But I still have to believe that at the end of the day, there is an explanation, and the fact that I don't know what it is doesn't mean ghosts are real and the souls of the dead have come back to bother the living. Like you've got to go, like what you were saying, you've got to go with the more likely solution. And I kind of think like that guy jumped the gun. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree. Obviously, like I said, I'm a scientist, very conservative. I will only say something if I have good reason to believe it's true. I didn't have good reason to believe that he was describing a hallucination, despite perhaps his past medical history. But I feel firm enough that we can conclude that this was not an incidence of time travel based on what he presented, and so I'm happy to leave it at that. He had an experience that we don't have evidence to suggest what it was in fact, right? And we have to leave it at that until we have more evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, folks, this show, as fascinating as it is not the only show that the atheist community of Austin produces. There are other shows such as Secular Sexuality. You can see that? Okay. Nonprofits, Talk Heathen, The Atheist Experience. And if you haven't been watching, I want to give y'all a quick sneak peek at some of the gold that you might have been missing.
Not that I want to like endorse misgendering, but if it's this person and they're calling you like the absolute wrong pronoun, you're like, oh yes, thank you, ma'am, to like a big burly cis man.
For a long time, I've known about a thing that they call soaking.
Right.
Which is where he puts it in and then they don't do anything.
Yes.
Because the Lord's vision, like T-Rex, is based on movement.
Wait, as the guest host here, am I obligated to say vagina at any point? If I am expected to say it, I could come up with some kind of weird excuse to try to work it into the conversation.
You can just listen. Close your eyes.
You won't have to look at our faces.
No, you don't have to. This isn't podcast form. You can look at something else. Look at the trees.
That is my legacy. That is what I've left for the world. That is my legacy. You're welcome, internet. You're welcome. Also vagina.
Oh man, I love the highlight reel. I really do.
And Nate, what's your bet? How long will that joke last? How many weeks consecutively?
I mean, it's kind of a running thing, so I'm going to give it 7 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to go even higher. 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it might be one of those things that kind of gets to be like an inside joke. So it's only like, hey, if you were watching the ACA shows during the autumn and winter of 2021, then you're going to get the vagina joke. Otherwise, man, you're just not one of the cool kids. But we've had quite a few funny memes come and go, and vagina is definitely one of the best ones that we've had. So. We definitely need to keep that up, and we need to normalize that. I think, as I'm sure as a medical doctor you can agree, we need to stop renaming things with these infantile monikers and just say what it is. It's a penis.
Yeah,
half of us have one.
I mean, you know what really kills me is, I don't know why, but the term womb, I really dislike. I prefer uterus. Like that's what you see in the medical textbooks. Whenever someone says womb, it just seems loaded with so much baggage from like not just religious, but all these other things. I don't know. It really gets under my skin for some reason. It's a uterus. Interesting.
Mm-hmm. I can't say that I've had an objection to the word womb, but I do certainly agree that there's benefit to be had. Especially in terms of, sex education and teaching your kids not to be comfortable with their own bodies. I think it's better to just use the actual anatomical terms. But before we go off on a tangent about penises, vaginas, and the various medical lexicon that we should all be using, we have a call. We have a call just for you. Just
really?
For you. Yes, we have a caller. They want to ask you specifically, not Nate, Not me. No one cares what I have to say, and I can't say that I blame them. But we have a call from Kennita in California, and I'm just going to let them go ahead and ask it to you. Kennita in California, you are live on Truth Wanted.
Hi, MD. I'm wondering whether, since you know about nanotechnology, I'm wondering if you've heard about cryonics.
I have heard the term. I know a little bit. Why don't you tell me what you think about cryonics? What do you mean when you say cryonics?
Basically, it's a procedure where immediately after you're declared dead, but before, as far as I'm concerned, you're really dead because death is a process. They lower your body to liquid nitrogen temperature and leave it there for as long as it takes for medical science to advance to the point where they could fix whatever was wrong with you and return you to life and health.
Yeah, so I've heard about this. I don't think that it's something that we can do with current technology. There's a saying in medicine that you're not dead until you're warm and dead, because people come back from being very, very cold and being what you'd call clinically dead, right? Their hearts stop, they're not breathing. But their metabolic processes in their cells have been slowed by the cold to such an extent that that you're not actually, the cells aren't dying, right? So it's got a biological basis to a certain extent. I watched a documentary on Netflix just earlier this week about a diver who ran out of oxygen in 4 degrees Celsius water and was under without air for about a half an hour. And he was able to be revived. And, there's some very reasonable biological explanations about that. Probably he was at such a depth that the partial pressure of oxygen in his tissues made it so that he had a lot of oxygen sort of stored in his tissues. But certainly the contribution of this very cold water and a very low body temperature contributed to him being able to be revived. Now, when you're talking about cryonics, I think that it's kind of a different story, and there's some problems. So first of all, I don't think we're anywhere near there with current medical technology.
Well, we certainly can't bring people back, right? Because yes, that'll probably take nanotechnology to, make sure that all of the pieces end up back where they belong. But
I think part of the process, you can't discount the process of the cooling, right? Because if you cool biological tissues too quickly, then they form ice crystals, and the ice crystals burst all the cells. And then all of your cells are going to be dead. So it's not just the rewarming, right? You can't just throw yourself, when you're inches from death, you can't just throw yourself into a vat of liquid nitrogen and wait for medical science to advance to the point where you can recover. I think that if we want to do this sort of thing, then both the freezing process and the recovery process need to be perfected.
Because Alcor currently uses a process called vitrification, where they get rid of the blood and replace it with cryoprotectant that keeps the cells from actually freezing. I guess you become more like a glass, and that's a process that would need to be reversed in the future, and we don't know how to do that yet. Actually, we've reversed it in tiny things, planarians and so on. But
so I guess I would say that if you can't bring someone back, then you can't know that you put them under properly, right? You have to do them both. So all these, I've heard of these companies that are saying, we don't know how to unfreeze you, but we'll freeze you.
Right. And we'll
freeze you now and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
I don't buy that. And then the other thing you have to consider is that whatever is killing you, that's bringing you to the brink of death, you're still going to have that, whether it's cancer or a heart attack or a brain tumor or whatever. That's not going to go away just from the freezing. I understand you're going to hope that they've figured something out in the future, but I don't know. That's a big gamble to take.
And the thing is too, like if you're if you don't know the end result, if you don't know the goal of the process, how can the method you're using get you there? You know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, I know the goal is to wake you up, but if you don't know how exactly you're going to do that, you know, it's kind of like stepping out your front door in Cincinnati and being like, I'm going to go to New York City, and then just setting off in a direction and walking. Like, you don't know what
the Wright brothers didn't know, you know, how they were going to get across the ocean, and we didn't know how we were going to get to.
Well, the Wright brothers didn't fly across the ocean, and the Wright brothers had a concept of what lift was. So they had a good reason to think that this would work. So, I mean, I'm not trying to completely discount it, Kennita. I'm just saying there's so many caveats here that like what MD Aware was saying, like, if we don't do the first steps of the process right, how do we know that it's going to be reversible in the future? I really don't think that you can be. So I would be extremely skeptical.
If I can put it in a medical context, like, because I do operations, I would not go into an operation to, say, remove a tumor from someone's liver if I wasn't going to be able to put them back together, right? And make sure that they could actually recover from the operation. The bottom line is, like, in medicine, we try to do as little harm as possible. And so, like, if it were me and you were my patient, Kennita, and you came and you said, I will have some disease that's going to kill me in 3 months. I'd like to get, you know, this cryonic procedure. What do you think? I would say, I recommend that you make the most of the time that you have left, because you may lose that little time to this very uncertain procedure. I would, with your best interest at heart, I would advise you not to go through with this sort of thing.
You do not put well, for one thing, it's not legal to do cryonic suspension until after someone has been declared dead, right? You are at the point where if you don't cryonically suspend this person, your only other options are cremation or burial, which have precisely zero chance. I
get what you're saying.
If you get suspended, it may not be a large chance, but given the trajectory that we seem to be on, right? If you had looked at the Wright brothers and told them that someday people would be on the moon, they might have had enough forward looking to say, oh, yeah, we might be able to do that day. We obviously couldn't do it then. We didn't have the materials. We didn't have the science. We didn't know how it could be done. But the possibility was there, and it's like, well, sure, go ahead and give it a try. Basically,
I get what you're saying, Kennita. You're saying that the risk is basically zero. You're not venturing anything. But I would say that that's only true if, you know, you consider all the factors, including, you know, the financial factor. Are these places going to charge you like a lot of money? Are they scamming you, basically? And then how are the people who love you going to react to this? You know, are they going to be deprived of, you know, the opportunity to say goodbye through whatever service that, you know, they want to do? I just think, you know, obviously, I don't know if this is something that you're considering doing. But,
I'm actually signed up with Alcor. I have a life insurance policy.
Okay.
Just like any other life insurance policy, but, you know, it pays off to Alcor, and it's not like they're getting rich on this because, you know, they only, basically, they can pretty much keep their doors open and do a little research in the direction of trying to improve both the freezing, actually vitrification these days, process, and, looking forward to when nanotechnology, which the biological version as opposed to the just molecular machines version, will be able to, it's like once you're in the doer and they just, and say in the future, they say, okay, we're going to bring you back. Well, let's see, all of the pieces are still there, and you can pretty much say, well, gee, this neurotransmitter has these pieces, and okay, they go here, etc., and reconstruct. And once you're reconstructed, they would probably say, you were reconstructed, but we're going to keep you cold because, let's see, your paper says you died of, a thyroid tumor. All right, so we'll fix that before we try to bring you back because, we don't want to thaw you out and have you immediately die of a thyroid tumor. Of course, medical science will have improved, certainly in the people suggest anywhere from 100 to 500 years that they'll be able to fix a lot of this stuff. And you would stay because once you're at liquid nitrogen temperature, you could stay there for an eon and nothing would change.
Right.
Yeah, I get what you're
it gets back to the process, though, that MD Aware was talking about. It's the process that's the flaw. So they may be able to fix the problem then, but they may not be able to fix the deficiencies in our primitive processes that we did back now. And I don't know. I wouldn't take that chance. What do you think,
Well,
MD?
the more advanced the science gets, the more damage they'll be able to fix.
So I think I agree with you, Kennita, that medical science is going to continue to advance. However, we're still bound by the physical laws of the universe and things like that, right? There is going to be, like for instance, if this process rendered you or rendered a person essentially down to the individual atoms and lost the information about how those atoms were arranged, there's nothing we can do to rearrange you. That there's a there's a law of physics that acts as a boundary to that. And I don't know anything about this company. I don't know anything about this vitrification process that you're describing. I would say what I've read and what I sort of know from my understanding of biology and medicine, I don't think that this technology is sufficiently mature to be feasible. However, I could be wrong, and I have been wrong in the past, and I'm going to be wrong in the future. So maybe I'm wrong about this, but the only thing I would say is it's your body. Obviously, it's your choice, and I would just, if it were me, I would be thinking about this not just in terms of its effect on me, but its effect on all the people that I care about.
Oh, that's true. You would,
Well said.
I know other people who are signed up. Some of them have their entire family signed up so that they would be sure to have people around when they came back. Some have relatives and friends who, are on board, even though they're not signed up themselves, and others are just going it alone. But the idea is that, well, I like living and I would like to have a chance to do more of it. And certainly but like I said, this is a chance when I would otherwise have none, because, and there are people I know who are religious who say, wait a minute, why do I need cryonics? Because I'm going to live forever anyway. And so I can basically,
now that
that
is an excellent point. I really like that you said that, Kennita. That is an excellent point. Why do you need cryogenics when you have eternity with Jeebus? That is I love it. All right, Kennita, I think we're going to move on. You wanted a hot take from a medical professional. You got one. You also got one from some random guy in Canada. But this was a great call. I want to thank you for calling in, and I just recommend that you be skeptical and maybe don't spend too much money on it, because that money could go to improve the lives of people that are still alive, and you might not, probably won't be able to be resuscitated according to, what we know now. And I think what we know now is infinitely more valuable than what we might know in the future. But hey, it's up to you. There's little risk. Just be careful, honey. Thank you for calling.
Thanks, Kennita.
That was interesting. I had to resist the urge to make a Futurama joke.
I had the same feeling.
Right? I'm like, I don't know. Maybe your dog gets cryogenically frozen, and you wake up 1,000 years from now, and all of a sudden you find out that 12 cents you had in your checking account's now made you a multi-billionaire. That would be pretty cool.
Oh, that would be amazing,
right? But
I totally get Kennita's, her assessment of things. It's kind of like a Pascal's wager. She doesn't see a downside if she's going in when she's already dead.
Wouldn't that already be too late, though? Like, if they were going to be able to revive you, wouldn't they have to do it when there was still some brain activity? Like, once that's gone, isn't it gone?
I mean, it depends what you mean by brain activity, right? This is the thing. Once you get into the details, it's like everything is a spectrum. It's
sticky.
Yeah, it's very sticky.
I don't think anybody knows enough about neuroscience to really say when they're, all those neurons have stopped firing enough such that your consciousness can't be reanimated.
Yeah. I certainly don't know, and I'm not prepared to make any firm statements about it. But I don't think that technology is mature enough to be investing in yet. I'd like to see maybe what this company has done with animal studies or whatever research they've done in preparation for human trials.
Kennita said that they have done this with small animals.
I'd be interested to read the studies.
I would love to hear that. I don't know that that's happened. I'm not saying it hasn't, Kennita, if you're still listening, but I'm just not familiar with it. But you know what? That actually is quite fascinating to me, and I may just look that up after the show, because what we want here on this show is the truth. And speaking of the truth, we have one more call that I think we ought to get to before the end of the show. We have a returning favorite. We have a star caller on the line, somebody that I've heard call into the show before, and I'm excited that Otangelo has called in today. He's got a question for you, MD Aware, and I am just going to let Otangelo ask it himself. Otangelo, welcome back. You are on Truth Wanted.
Yes, hello guys. Thank you for taking my call. I was specially motivated to call in because I'm seeing that there is a doctor, MD Aware, here on the show. So I think, of course, as a doctor, you are a well-educated person, especially in regards of issues like biology. And I think this is an important topic which is commonly being discussed between theists and atheists. So my question would be to you, with the evidence that you understand biology, biochemistry, and these things, how do you explain life, the origin of life, and the origin of us as humans, based on the claim that there is no creator, no designer?
So I think you have two separate questions there. One of them is the origin of life, and the other one's the origin of humans. Or if I could put it another way, the origin of species. And I think that sort of has been very well solved, right? We have a good understanding of how all species, but especially humans, have originated through evolutionary processes. And we could delve into it for hours and hours, but there's plenty of evidence that shows that once we have, one form of life, one form of self-replicating organism, as you might call it, that it can diversify and grow in, complexity and this sort of thing. And so I think that part of the equation is fairly well settled in the scientific community. The part that is less well settled is the origin of life, from sort of non-life. And I think we have a lot of biochemical potential explanations for it, right? There are some classic experiments that were done by Russians whose name escaped me back in like the 50s and 60s, I think, that show that you can create under these particular environmental conditions, you can get self-replicating molecules from non-self-replicating molecules from basic building blocks. And that's sort of how people get to life. And there's a lot of hypothetical things we've found, through spectroscopy, looking at like the tails of comets in, even our solar system, that there are, organic molecules existing in space that we think under the right circumstances could lead to life. But the question that you're asking about, how exactly, what was the mechanism by which life originally formed? I don't think that we have the answer to that. And I don't think that that's a question that we'll be able to answer with the same scientific confidence that we can answer the question of evolution, right? We have like a lot of lines of evidence about how species evolved. And what we don't have is, evidence about what the mechanism of the first life form was at this point. And I don't know that physical evidence even exists. So I don't know that could be determined. You're kind of asking like a historical question almost. And I know that's not super satisfying, but I think that that's probably the accurate answer.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know is still a better answer than God did it. But Otangelo,
of course,
go ahead and respond.
Yeah, of course, the question comes up, when would a designer or intelligence be a more case-adequate explanation, especially in regards of the origin of life? And you are correct in saying that science doesn't have an explanation. Now, the question is, can we say, well, we don't have an explanation yet, and therefore we cannot insert God as a gap explanation just because we don't know yet? And I think that science has moved forward a big deal in about 70 years in regarding to unravel the complexity even of the most simple cell. And science isn't even there to explain the origin of the basic building blocks of life. And there is a good reason for that, because prior to DNA replication, there was no natural selection. And that is a big...
So I don't think...
Well, natural selection...
I don't agree with some of the things you're saying there, Otangelo. So we do have evidence of how the basic building blocks can form, like specifically RNAs. We have evidence of how those can form. We have evidence of the building blocks of proteins. Those are the things that I was alluding to are found in sort of the tails of comets and things like this. So there are organic molecules that we found. And the other thing that I want to pick up on is the fact that there are experiments that have shown that it's possible to get to self-replicating molecules and therefore life-like processes through natural means. And I think that the fact that we have demonstrated that possibility makes it more likely than invoking a divine creator or a designer, because we haven't proven that that's a possibility, right? The difference between, your question was, what's the mechanism by which life did evolve? I don't know that, but I know an example of how life could have evolved. I've demonstrated that, how life could have come from non-life. We have evidence of that. through natural processes. What we don't have is any incidents or any evidence to show that there's a possibility that non-life can lead to life through the intervention of a divine creator or a designer of any kind, right? One of them has a demonstration of possibility, the other one doesn't, and neither of them have demonstrations that they actually occurred.
One thing I'd like to point out too is that the time that we can, Otangelo, if I could just throw this in here real quick, the time that we could maybe reasonably start to consider that God might have done it is when religion is able to push back on a scientific theory or a scientific discovery, right? Like we had God created all the animals. Now we know that that's not true because of the process of natural selection and evolution. We have God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and we know that's not true because we know the earth formed from an accretion disk. We have, well, maybe then God just created the universe, and now we know that that's not the case because we have a good idea of how the universe began. And it seems like religion is constantly being forced back into these tiny gaps of things that, well, I don't know this yet, so therefore God. But I have yet to see an example of the opposite, of how a religious claim has pushed back on a scientific body of knowledge and been correct. Can you think of any?
Well, you guys have raised so many issues which would have to be tackled, and
that's what we do on Truth Wanted, my friend.
Here. But let me address just one assertion, which was made by MD, and in regards of the origin of RNAs, I'll quote here from Leslie Orgel, and he says, it is possible that all of these and many other difficulties will one day be overcome, and that a convincing prebiotic synthesis of RNA will become available. However, many researchers in the field, myself included, think that this is very unlikely. So they disagree basically with what MD just said. And I'll quote here also Eugene Koonin in the book The Logic of Chance. And he says, despite many interesting results to its credit, when judged by the straightforward criterion of reaching or even approaching the ultimate goal, the origin of life field is a failure. We still do not even have a plausible, coherent model, let alone a validated scenario for the emergence of life on Earth. And you ask,
of course we don't. But
God
just because we don't know doesn't mean that God did it. And in fact, we have evidence that amino acids can indeed form from basic organic compounds. Have you heard of the Miller-Urey experiment, Otangelo?
Well, so let me ask you. So yes, of course.
Have you heard of the Miller-Urey experiment, though?
Yes. So let me ask you something. So suppose that there were over 500 different amino acids extant on the prebiotic Earth, and life uses just 20, in some cases 22. So there was no selection process there because molecules, they do not have by themselves the urge to become alive. Right. So how did amongst all these 500 nature select those which are used in life, concentrated them then in a very specific building site to then start to complexify themselves and becoming complex proteins, and in the end,
that's a pretty small dice roll. That's a pretty small dice roll. Even if you've got 500 and you only need 22, if you've got all of these chemicals and all of these compounds forming, conjoining, interacting, boiling and bubbling, it seems pretty likely that at some point you're going to get the right mix. But I want to go back to the Miller-Urey experiment, because we have actually tried to assemble basic compounds in our best understanding of a primordial Earth environment, and we have found that they did form themselves into these basic building blocks of life. And this isn't by design. This is just chemistry.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all it is.
It's the physical properties. I have trouble parsing out exactly what you mean with your example with the 500 amino acids going down to like the 20. I'm not sure what you're getting at, Otangelo, but I think what I would say is that it's all boiling down to physical processes. Why were these 20, you would say selected for life? They were selected through natural processes because they were the most effective ones in performing whatever task it was that led them to the ability to self-replicate because of their physical characteristics, right? It's the same way that, like, why does a piece of driftwood wash up on the beach when a rock sinks to the bottom of the ocean, right? It's because of the physical characteristics of the thing, right? A piece of driftwood is long, it's buoyant on the water, it can wash up, and it can look like, when the tide goes out, that it's left, almost like a fence looking thing up on the beach. And you might be fooled into thinking that somebody designed and put that fence there. But really, what this arose from was just the physical characteristics of the objects interacting with their environment. And it's really the same, like, kind of like we say, it's turtles all the way down. It's all just, it's all just physical things interacting by physical laws with their environment. That's at least what I would say. And the only other thing that I would challenge you on, Otangelo, is if you're going to say that God is a more likely explanation, then you have to prove God first before you can use God as an explanation for a phenomenon like the origin of life. You have to establish that God exists, the same way that we had to establish that chemistry exists. We had to establish the laws of physics and biochemistry before we could use that as an explanation for the origin of life. And so I would say that if you want to make the claim that God is the explanation for the origin of life, then you would have to do all that same work that all these physicists and chemists and biochemists have done over the past, 300 years before you can make that claim.
Well, I disagree with what you said, that molecules, they could eventually interact together and then somehow complexify. And the scientific evidence is actually exactly the opposite. And I can quote you here from a science paper from Stephen Benner.
We've seen it happen.
Let me and give you that quote here.
But Otangelo, that's simply not true, though.
What can I answer to you?
You can say it, but that doesn't make it so. Otangelo, listen, let's have a conversation here. I want you to go and look at this Miller-Urey experiment. We have literally observed basic compounds forming into these amino acids with no intervention whatsoever. We've seen it happen. We've documented it happening. It's been peer reviewed. Other people have tried to reproduce this, and it worked. That's what science is did it work for you? Hey, let me try it. Yeah, hey, it worked for me. Hey, maybe we're onto something here. So for you to just say that it didn't happen when I've literally just given you an example of when it happened, it seems a little bit dishonest. So
the other thing I would say, Otangelo, is maybe you and I are reading different papers.
Sure.
It's literally my job right now to read, papers and interpret their experimental results and try to figure out what the truth is, right? And so maybe you and I are just reading different papers. So I think what the solution is what you should do is you should look up a technique called a systematic review. And that's a method of searching through all of the published literature, and you narrow your search in on a subject. And so what you could do is you could create a systematic review, conduct a systematic review of the literature using whatever, search tool that you want. Like Google Scholar is a reasonable place to start. And you conduct a search that identifies every single paper that has investigated this. And then you have to weigh up all of those after you've reviewed them all. And on balance, then you can say, well, the weight of the literature, the weight of the experimental evidence says one or the other. And I haven't done that systematic review. And I don't know if you have. I would venture to guess that you haven't, because it's a reasonably complex thing to do. But if you're really passionate about answering this question, and this means a lot to you, then I think that's your next step.
Okay, can I answer now?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so again, first of all, in that Miller-Urey experiment, there were not all amino acids synthesized. 8 have never been synthesized, like tryptophan, which is the most complex amino acid. It has never been synthesized in the lab. You have the homochirality problem and many other problems which have not been solved. But I would like to address again what you claimed, that some chemical reactions eventually could then complexify to, in the end, and the trajectory to come to a self-replicating living form.
Otangelo, I just want to make sure. Did you hear what I said?
Yes, and could I please now quote just to?
No, so I think if regardless of what you quote, I think that the problem still remains that you and I are obviously reading different papers, right? You can quote, and I could go and look through the literature and I could quote, but until we've both done a systematic review and looked at all of the papers, then how do we know that you're not just don't happen to be coming across all of the papers that tend to support your conclusion, right? And I could be coming across and reading only the papers that support my conclusion. Because in any scientific field, there's going to be, some debate amongst scientists about the nuances of what happened. So I think, rather than going back and forth quoting papers, we need to do a proper, thorough, systematic review of all of the published experiments on this before we can draw a conclusion.
Well, I quoted you from Eugene Koonin. You can look him up. He's a very respected biochemist, and he has concluded that there is no known trajectory of how life could have started after 60, 70 years of scientific investigation. And one problem, a big problem, is that systems given energy and left to themselves devolve to give useless complex mixtures, asphalts. The literature reports exactly 0 confirmed observations where a replication involving replicable imperfections, evolution emerged spontaneously from a devolving chemical system. It is impossible for any living chemical system.
But that's a leap, Otangelo. You just made another leap there, though. You went from your expert doesn't know to it's impossible. And your expert can't know that because he wasn't there 4.5 billion years ago. There's no way for him to know that. And just because we haven't discovered how tryptophan originally came to be, again, it doesn't mean God did it. I don't know is still a better answer.
I would say we can use eliminative inductions, and when we have 2 possible explanations, one is intelligence and the other is no intelligence, and the no intelligence hypothesis only results in no positive end result in going to show that life from non-life by undirected means is possible, then it is logical that at a certain point you need to come to the conclusion,
just because we don't know doesn't mean that your answer is correct, though.
Yeah, let me ask you,
I don't know doesn't mean that you got it right. That's not how science works.
Let me ask you, Otangelo, if so say you're right. Currently, say just for hypothetical, that right now we don't have evidence that non-life can give rise to life. Does that mean that we can reasonably draw the conclusion that God did it? I would say no, because tomorrow I could go into the lab and do an experiment that shows that life can arise from non-life. We can't conclude that it's possible yet. My read of the literature is that we can conclude that, but you disagree. So that's fine. Until we do a systematic review of the literature and we, get a good balanced assessment, we shouldn't make a decision either way. But Nate's point is still valid, right? Just because we haven't figured it out yet doesn't mean that you can just appeal to God did it.
Okay. In what case would you say, okay, God is the better explanation?
I would not.
I've already answered that question. If there was ever a case where religion was able to disprove something that the body of scientific data had already established, because again, scientific data has pushed the religious narrative back again and again and again and again. I'm not familiar with any examples where the opposite is true. So if maybe that started to happen, then I would give it a little more credence. But Otangelo, we have to wrap up. I just want to say that I like you, man. I like talking to you, even though we disagree and we can get a little bit heated. I like the fact that you're calling in and you're asking questions. You seem like an honest guy, and yeah, even though we disagree, I really do like talking to you, and I hope I get to talk to you again.
Yeah, I think Otangelo, you've got a very curious mind, and I think if you applied it, you could be a really good scientist. You know, you could, if you learned some research techniques, you could be really driven and very, very productive as a scientist, if that's what you wanted to do.
Otangelo is awesome. Are you there? I think he's gone.
Looks like it, eh?
I think he's gone. That's okay. Hey, you know what? I love the conversations where you can talk to people that you disagree and not just get into shouting matches. I think that is the mission of the ACA, and I love that Otangelo called in, and your answers were on point. Like knocked it out of the park for a first timer.
I mean, like I say, I do science every day of the week. So
that's amazing. All right. Well, folks, we do have to get going. But before we do, I want to, again, thank MD Aware for being on the show. MD Aware, where can our audience find out more about you?
So I am I don't have anything to promote. I don't have anything to push or sell. I'm just here to answer questions. So
cool.
We'll see if there's demand and the ACA wants to invite me back to be on Truth Wanted at some point. I'm happy to oblige.
We'll see if we like you. I drink Budweiser, by the way, just saying. That might help your case. But folks, for the rest of you, if you'd like to support the show, you can do so by donating to our Patreon at tiny.cc/PatreonTW. There's a couple different tiers there. You could get your name shouted out during the show if you donate, and you will be a part of producing more epic content with folks like MD Aware and some other random guy. Also, you can support the show by becoming a member. You can get emojis in our live chat. Your name gets highlighted in the chat in the fancy green letters, and you will be immune to chat timeouts. It shall not touch you. You can talk as much as you want for as little as 99 cents a month. So become a member on the YouTube and support our mission. We've also got merch. Go to tiny.cc/merchaca. We got your hoodies, we got your stickers, we got your t-shirts, and we got your masks here, folks. This COVID thing is not going away anytime soon. So get yourself a Truth Wanted mask. And you can also listen to our audio only channel. Apparently, people listen to this show in audio only. I feel bad for you that you can't see my handsome mug, but you know, that's fine. I listen to all the ACA shows while I'm at work. I've got it just talking in my ear as I work away. So go to tiny.cc/AEN podcast for your one-stop shop to all of our shows in audio-only form. You'll find your Truth Wanted, and you'll find me on a couple of other shows every now and then. Maybe you'll find MD Aware too as well. And for those of you who might be bashful, for those of you who might not want to call in, you don't have to call in live. I understand. It's tough. It's intimidating. You can also email us, and we may just hit up your question with the mailbag. Email us at truth@atheist-community.org. Or a little quicker, there's also a Facebook group. It's run for fans. It's run by fans. The Truth Wanted fan group, tiny.cc/FBTWG. I'll say that again. tiny.cc/FBTWG. Interact with other fans. I've recently posted a very, very juicy picture about the birds aren't real conspiracy that MD Aware and I were talking about before the show. And that is some legendary stuff. last but definitely not least, I want to thank the people who actually do the work to make this show a reality, so that guys like MD and guys like me can sit up here and talk to guys like Otangelo. I want to see the crew. Show me that crew cam. Crew! Look at those handsome devils. Wow. Thanks, guys. Thank you for doing what you do every single week. You mean the world to us. So that's our show for tonight. I was your temporary host, Nate Smith. Dan will be back. I believe he's back next week. But yes, he's going to be back, folks. You're not stuck with me for very long. And as always, remember, seek out the truth. See you next time. Kitty!
Watch the nonprofits and join the hosts in the live chat. Sundays at 3 p.m. Central between the Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen. Visit tiny.cc/YTNP.